Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of the enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors to the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come and let us meet together at Hechan-Ephraim in the plain of Ono." But they intended to do me harm. And I sent messengers to them, saying, "I am doing great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. In the same way, Sanballat, for the 5th time, sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. It was written, "It is reported among the nations," and Geshem also says it, "that you and the Jews intend to rebel, and that is why you're building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. You have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, 'There is a king in Judah.' And now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together." Then I sent to him, saying, "No such things as you say have been done, for you're inventing them out of your own mind." For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking, "Their hands will drop from the work, and it will not be done." But now, O God, strengthen my hands. Now when I went to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, son of Mehetabel, who was confined to his home, he said, "Let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you by night." But I said, "Should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in." And I understood and saw that God had not sent him, but he had pronounced prophecy against me, because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way and sin. And so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, O my God, according to these things that they did, and also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. So the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month Elul in 52 days.
All right, so we'll look at closely today at Nehemiah 6 and walk through that chapter, really verse by verse. First, I want you to think for a second with me about what it would have been like for Nehemiah to be sitting there once again, having Sanballat come up against him and come at him to get him to stop his project. I think about some projects that I've taken on in my life, and it's often those home projects where I get kind of in the middle of it, and when I started the project, I felt so good. I felt like I got this. I'm going to knock this out. This is going to be easy. And then about halfway through, maybe like getting close to the end, I realized I put a wrong part in somewhere along the way and everything's backwards. And I'm thinking to myself, what was I doing? Why did I even attempt this? I know some of you are a little more handy than me, but when it comes to projects like that, I often find myself in the middle or towards the end of the project just going, why did I even come here? Why am I here right now working on this? And for Nehemiah, I think he probably could have asked the same question as he's like getting to the end of this project, and it's just like he's bombarded again by the opposition. He's got to be thinking like, why am I even trying this? And yet he like holds so tight on his conviction. I was reminded this week as I was thinking about like people that have kind of overcome odds to get and accomplish a great project. I was thinking of the Wright brothers. I picked up a biography on the Wright brothers a few years ago, one that was written by David McCullough. Really good book. And as I knew that the Wright brothers were the first ones to put a plane in the air, but I knew nothing else. And so I was reading the book and I was like catching up on some of the history of like what got them there. And what stood out to me was there was like a 2-year period that the author talks about where they made no progress at all. It was like everything they did was a dead end. And somehow they were so obsessed with what they were doing that they did not stop. And they just kept going. They kept going. They kept going. One of the quotes that stood out to me in this book was from a local newspaper editor. And he said, "I used to chat with them in a friendly way. And I was always polite because I sort of felt sorry for them. They seemed like well-meaning, decent enough young men, yet there they were, neglecting their business to waste their time day after day on this ridiculous flying machine." And so they continue on. It's like it's been a couple of years that like the editor talked about their bicycle shop that was their main job. That's how they earned a living, and that's what supported them going out to try to build an airplane. It was sort of like falling by the wayside. They have been neglecting it. They were driving, or I'm sorry, not driving. They were going by train from Ohio to North Carolina to build this plane and try to ride it. And through the whole period, it was just like the sand, the people, nothing seemed to work. Until one day, it kind of started with Orville drinking too much coffee and eventually figuring out, oh, we need to change the way that the rudder works. And then they were off. David McCullough writes, though, about them actually flying. Here's how he says it. They endured violent storms, accidents, one disappointment after another, public indifference or ridicule, and clouds of demon mosquitoes. To get to and from the remote sand dune testing ground, they'd made 5 round trips from Dayton, a total of 7,000 miles by train, all to fly a little more than a half a mile. He then adds at the end of that, no matter, they had done it. It kind of feels the same way when I was reading through Nehemiah 6 and we get to verse 15 and it says, and we had built the wall. 52 days later, we had built the wall. I think our series started about 52 days ago. And so here we are. If you can imagine us starting back in that first week talking about Nehemiah and like him having this on his heart and him going and him actually starting the work, it's been that kind of length of time. Nehemiah, like the Wright brothers, has faced problem after problem. I don't know if you've thought about it like this as we've gone through this series, but it's like as soon as he gets past one problem, he's got another problem. I don't like it when life is like that. When I get rid of one problem and another one pops up, I'm like, come on, I've had enough already. But think about it. In chapter 1, Nehemiah's first problem is a personal problem. I'll give you 5 problems. His personal problem is as he hears about what's happening in Jerusalem, he's like, I have to do something about this. It becomes very personal to him. I have to see things change. I have to see the walls rebuilt. And then that personal problem turns into a political problem, okay? And that political problem is the fact that King Xerxes had said and made a decree, you can't rebuild Jerusalem. That's who Nehemiah was working for. And so all of a sudden, this is a political problem because he knows if he's going to be able to rebuild there, he's got to get the king to reverse his decree. And that's exactly what happens because God's hand is on him. And then that political problem turns into a planning problem, right? You remember when Nehemiah showed up at the city and he sees it's like worse than he probably thought. And as he goes and surveys the wall, he has to figure out, how will I rebuild a wall when I've only been tasting wine my whole life as the cupbearer, and I've only been serving that to others. And now I'm going to be in the construction business. How am I going to do that? How will I go about this? And that planning problem then turns into a pushback problem, because what happens in chapter 4? Well, actually, it started in chapter 2, but in chapter 4, we really see it come to fruition with Sanballat, and he shows up and he's like, guys, you need to stop what you're doing. You're never going to be able to build a wall. You'll never be able to make it. And that pushback problem is him facing opposition. And then that pushback problem turns into a people problem. John covered that last week for us when the inside, the internal struggles that the people were having when there were poor who were being neglected, poor who were being enslaved because they were going in debt. All these people had kind of neglected their farmland to come and work on the walls. And Nehemiah says, look, we can't do this. We've got to look out for the poor. We've got to make sure everyone's taken care of. And in this, we've got to make sure that they're taken care of, and I will take the lead on that. Nehemiah leads out and says, I won't take the portion that even I could take. And so that's kind of what, he's just had one problem after another. That's what's gotten us to this point. And now we've got more of the pushback problem here in chapter 6 again, as he's right at the end of the project, right when he's seeing the end. And I'm just imagining Nehemiah going oh, why won't it stop? And And why did I even attempt this? Maybe in a moment of weakness, he thinks, why did I even attempt this? But yet, he holds strong. He holds conviction. And that's what we see in chapter 6. The first truth you probably need to pull out of chapter 6 that we just read, we're just covering these 15 verses that Sydney read for us. The first truth I think you need to see is that the opposition does not stop. Now, I've seen a lot of people teach through Nehemiah, not a lot, but I've at least looked at a few people who've taught through Nehemiah before. And the most frequently way in which people teach through Nehemiah is to take chapter 4 and chapter 6 and put it together. Or maybe even 4, 5, and 6. And they look at it and they go, I'm not trying to say that that's a horrible way to do it or anything like that. But I'm just saying this is the normal way to do it. And I want us to think about this for a second. And they look at 4, 5, and 6 and they say, Nehemiah had both external struggle and internal struggle. And here's how you overcome that. And we did that in chapter 4, and we did that in chapter 5. But here we are back in chapter 6, and here's why I think it's important that we didn't just put chapters 4 through 6 together and put it all in one and just say, hey, here's how you overcome this. It's because when you read chapter 4 and you kind of study through it, then the next week we pick up chapter 5 and we study through it. And now here we are in chapter 6, and we say, okay, here it is. Here's the opposition again. Guess what this is like? This is like our lives. Right? The opposition doesn't just hit us for a little while and then go away for good. The opposition throws a punch, and then maybe it's a second, and then there's another punch that gets thrown our way. And so even in the way in which we're studying this, I think was helpful for us. I won't say that I was overly intentional. I just thought, I think this is how I'd like to do it. And as we put the scriptures together, I've seen how this is important for us to look at chapter 6. And I'm going to kind of preach the same sermon I preached in chapter 4. So if you have your notes from chapter 4, you might just pull them up again and then highlight and underline again, because I'm going to say a lot of the same things. And I could see why it'd be easy to just kind of make it into one sermon. But I think there's a reason that the Bible repeats itself. I think there's a reason that the author didn't just sandwich it together. And I think one of those big reasons is for us to recognize that the opposition can be relentless. The opposition can just keep coming. I hope that's not too discouraging, but it's just true. When the Bible tells us that we have a real enemy, Satan, he never stops prowling, looking for whom he can devour. Look back at verse 4, and even in the way in which Sanballat has come at Nehemiah, kind of sums up this principle that the opposition is relentless. In verse 4 of chapter 6, it says, and they sent to me 4 times in this way. And I answered him in the same manner. I had an enemy myself when I was in elementary school. I can't remember what grade I was in. Maybe my parents remember. My parents are here today. I'm glad to have them here with us. And I had to be in 3rd or 4th grade or something like that. And there was a kid that was like a bully on our bus. And this kid he liked to fight everyone. He was picking people off one by one. And he would go to this one kid and he'd say, I want to fight you. And I held out the longest probably. It was 3 weeks where he was every day he'd come to me and say, I want to fight you. I'm like, oh, why? I don't understand. He's like, I want to fight you. And I was like, I'm good, thank you. And every day he would come to me and I would say, no, I'm good. And then eventually, after 2 weeks, he was like, I don't know how long it was. It felt like a really long time. And I held strong for a really long time until this bully finally, I'd had enough. Okay, I'll fight. Fine. So we stepped out onto the curb, and I won't tell you how bad he got hurt, but we'll move on into this next point. No, I'm just kidding. It didn't go down like that at all. But the point I'm trying to make, I'll tell you the story later if you want. But the point I'm trying to make is this bully, he would not stop. And he was like, I'm going to fight you. I'm going to fight you. And finally I was like, okay, fine. I tell that as a funny story, but that's how the enemy works. It's how the opposition works. When they come at us and he comes at us. And it's hard to stand our ground. It's hard to stand firm. It's hard to keep that conviction. But Nehemiah does stand. when we keep looking at a story, he right, it's 4 times that Sanballat comes out and he answers. In verse 3, this was his answer. I'm going to backtrack now to verse 3. He says, "And I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop until I leave, while I leave it and come down to you?" I'm going to give you 4 ways in which we see Nehemiah stand in this chapter, and that's the first. We see Nehemiah stand with convictional purpose. Convictional purpose. We have a real enemy. His name is Satan. Ephesians 6 tells us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, and powers of the dark world, spiritual forces of evil. And they come at us. Some days it may be a physical battle. Some days it truly can be just a physical battle. It can be a physical obstacle we face. But probably more often than not, more often than we think, it's spiritual, because Ephesians 6 tells us our struggle is not against flesh and blood. And we'll often be facing a battle that we'll say, you know what, probably if I look a little deeper, there's some spiritual forces of evil at work here. We need to pay attention to this. And because we have this real enemy, we'll be like me there, having to stand day after day. It's like me on the bus there, having to stand against this bully. And at some point, we're going to want to give in. How do we keep standing? In Nehemiah first, we see convictional purpose on his part, where he says, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Do you have that kind of conviction? Where you would say, whatever you feel coming against you, I have this conviction that I am so obsessed with, like the Wright brothers. I think about how they were so obsessed with flying that nothing was going to stop them. Do you have this kind of conviction where you hold on to it so tightly that you know you're going to stand firm? Sanballat was trying to bring Nehemiah, take him away from his task. Nehemiah could have said yes. And it would have been very easy for him to have said yes. I would imagine that he felt like this might bring some relief. Like, I'm going to get him off of, if I just go and meet with him, then maybe he'll stop. Maybe, like, we've made it this far, right? At the beginning of the chapter, it says that the wall was up, everything except the gates. So maybe Nehemiah's like, okay, he's seen how far we've made it. It's possible that this meeting could just be him kind of like wanting to smooth out our relationship. Nehemiah could have justified why he could have come down from the wall, but it wasn't done yet. It wasn't done yet, and he knew somewhere in his mind and his heart that like Sanballat really was trying to do him harm. And even for him to get down off the wall where he told him to go and meet was about a day's journey. On the plain of Ono, it would have been a day's journey from Jerusalem. He would have been there probably for a day, and then a day travel back, and 3 days was just too much time, as Nehemiah was so urgent about his task. And so he stays and he says, I'm doing a great work. I can't come down. What's your great work? We've kept going back to that, returning to that question, what is it that God's calling you to? What is it that God's calling our church to? What is it that we hold conviction about? And we'll get tempted at times to come down off the wall if we don't hold that conviction really tight. I know as a leader here, as the lead pastor, I'm thinking, what is it that we need to hold conviction about as a church? I was thinking about an example, like where that could come up. And I know I was thinking about today, we've just switched, just heads up for everybody that's a part of our setup team. We've switched to where we are having a few less setup days. And we're like spacing that out more. So we've got setup teams that are doing every other month now. And our team, good job, guys, today. We got set up. We did a great job. I'm not going to lie, we did good. But as we were setting up, I was thinking to myself, man, it sure would be nice to, like, if we could kind of have our own space and we didn't have to like worry about this and why is this dirty? Why are we having to sweep this today and vacuum this today? It would be nice if we had our own space. And I could imagine someone coming along and like, this could be really amazing. But somebody would say, hey, we've got this church building. It's just a little ways outside of Athens. And would you be interested in it? We'll give it to you for free. We'd have to go, okay, let's pray about that. That sounds really great to have your own space, your own building. But I think one of the convictions that we've held onto really strong, we've said this is 5 Points Church, not to say that like only you can only come to church here if you live in 5 Points, but we've said, okay, we're going to place a marker right here, kind of in the middle of town, that's close to UGA, and kind of in the center of this town. And we've kind of said, or not kind of, we have said, we want to be a presence, a gospel presence here in a way where anyone from around here and into Athens and even outside of Athens, you're welcome here. But this is our spot. And so I could imagine if someone called us and said, hey, we've got a building for you, and we're only 20 minutes from you, that could be very tempting. We might say, okay, yeah, like let's talk about that. But I think for us to hold our conviction and our purpose for being, we'd say, no, like maybe we'll go a little further from this spot. But somehow we're in this circle where we're kind of in this proximity. God has placed us here, and we want to have influence here. And may God grant that. May God use us to do that, right? And we'd have to hold conviction on that. Where are you having to hold conviction in your life? What does God put on your heart that you have to hold on to that may be difficult, and for you, you may be tempted to go off the wall? I think about a friend who got a job offer, and he was bouncing it off of me, and it sounded really good to me. It was a job that came with a lot of money and a lot of prestige. Not bad, right? The salary alone was like, I think you should take that job. That sounds great. It also came with some prestige. It would just have allowed him to be in like some circles it was a cool opportunity. And with that job, it came with some flexibility, but it would mean that he would like basically have to leave his family for days on end. And he was so committed in the season of life that like be close to his kids and not to be away a lot, that as he talked about it, he was like, I know this isn't right. And I was like, well, are you sure about that? Like for my sake, it would, if you did this, I could see a few perks where that, like I could get some things from this personally. Sounds pretty good. And he was so sold on his conviction of like what he needed to be as a dad and as a husband in the season that he said no. And so here I was supposed to be like cheering him along. I'm like trying to take him off the wall. No, I was encouraging him, and that for him was like a conviction he held. So I'll leave it there, and I want that to kind of sit a lot. We'll move through the rest of these a little quicker, but I want you to think about that conviction of purpose and where you might hold that, where our church needs to hold that. Let's keep moving. Let's go to verse 5. Not only did Sanballat come to Nehemiah 4 times, it was a 5th time that he comes to him. And this time he says, I have a letter. This letter is going to go out. And it's going to say, this is so good. It is reported among the nations. And Geshem also says it. Did you catch that? It's reported among the nations. Like they so-and-so say it, but also Geshem. That you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there is a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together. Sanballat makes another swing at Nehemiah. This time he maligns him. He is like saying, here's what we've heard. So-and-so has said this, and Geshem too. That you're trying to make yourself king. And we talked about this week when we were with some of the leaders in our church that were going over this text, and we were talking about like how this had to have really stung. Right? Anytime someone lies about you and tries to ruin your reputation, it just hurts. You been there before? Where someone who has, I heard it said like this week, where someone who's not telling the truth but has the microphone, they're the one with the microphone, they're the one that everyone's hearing. It's kind of like, it doesn't matter what the truth is, but whoever has the microphone, that's what matters. Like that's what people hear. And that's what it feels like. That's how it had to feel like for Nehemiah, that like he can just go and say this and people could believe it. And what if that gets out there? And what if it gets back to the king? After all the things he's done to help me and get me to this point, if he hears that, that would be devastating. If he believes that, and he's got to be burning up inside, you would think, right? That these guys want to malign me like this. I don't understand. And you see how Nehemiah responds. He doesn't jump into the same pool and play the same game. This is what I call a committed protest. Look at verse 8. He says, "So I sent to them, and I said, no such things as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out of your mind." You're making stuff up, brother. And that's all he does. He doesn't like get in there and call them names. He doesn't say, well, did you hear what Sanballat did? I'm going to tell you, and he doesn't start making up things about him. He just says, here's what's true, and he speaks the truth. And then he quickly goes from speaking the truth to appealing to the God who is truth. In verse 9, here's Nehemiah's next move. He has a committed protest, and then he has constant prayer. We've seen this all through Nehemiah's story, that he goes and he says, "For they wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, God, strengthen our hands." He goes from saying, look, that's not true, and then he goes straight over here and he just says, "God, here's where we're at right now. Please help us. God, strengthen our hands." So even in the midst of threats, opposition, and lies, Nehemiah's first move, and we've seen this again throughout the whole book, is prayer. We'll see it again in verse 14. Nehemiah is constantly praying. As he responds to the enemy, he takes what he is facing and he gives it to God. In verse 14, Nehemiah prays again. This time it's in response to what happens in verse 10, when he encounters yet another attack from the enemy. This time it's Shemaiah. He's a prophet. And he's come to Nehemiah and he says, "Nehemiah, come over here with me. I don't know if you've heard, but there are people who are going to kill you tonight." And this had to sit on Nehemiah like truth. First of all, Shemaiah is one of his people. So Sanballat is an outsider. Geshem's an outsider. And here's Shemaiah, one of the Jewish priests, and he has come and he said, Nehemiah, first of all, has to think he's getting somewhat of a reprieve. As he goes to sit down with him and meet him where he's at home, and he's like, something's happened with him that he has to meet him at home. And as he's talking with him, he has to be thinking, okay, let's take a breather here for a second. After all that I've gone through, here's one of my fellow men, and we're going to talk. And Shemaiah says, "Listen, someone's out to kill you." And for Nehemiah, he has to think that's true. Like, at this point, he's had nothing but death threats, and he's seen that they could act on it. And so when he hears this, it has to ring as a possibility. And then Shemaiah says, here's what you should do. You should go into the temple. Go there and hide. And you look at Nehemiah's response, and he says, "And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in." You see, Shemaiah was telling him to go into the temple, and that was something that they could not do. Nehemiah, because he was not a priest, could not go into the temple, pass into the inner court. In fact, in 2 Chronicles 26, King Uzziah decided himself to do that. According to the law, you would die, but for King Uzziah, the way that God decided to judge him there was not straight death, but to give him leprosy when he went into the inner court. So Nehemiah says, when he answers, "And what man such as I should go into the temple and live?" he's saying, I will not disobey God. And there, in that, I think he discerns that this man is not from God. And what he uncovers later is that Sanballat and his cronies had hired him to try to draw him away. Man, doesn't that feel like a lot? All the things that Nehemiah has faced, doesn't it feel like a lot? Doesn't that sit heavy? And yet Nehemiah persists. This last thing you see Nehemiah do to stand is that he shows continued persistence. Continued persistence to the point where he gets to, in verse 15, we see that the wall is completed. He holds such conviction. He's ready to protest. He constantly prays, and he continually persists to the point where the wall is complete. We'll kind of pick up verse 15 next week and celebrate the completion of the wall. But as I walk through those verses and study, I thought that's a lot. I counted at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 places in which the enemy went after Nehemiah. Let's put those up for a second. When you think about the opposition, how the opposition can be relentless, I counted these 7 ways in which the opposition came after Nehemiah to distract him. When he tried to bring him down off the wall, he tried to distract him. When he maligned him by dragging him into the lies, he tried to frighten him. That's what Nehemiah said. He was like, he's just doing this to frighten us. He tried to discourage him. In verse 9, it says, so their hands would stop the work. He tried to divide them. You know, Sanballat is literally buying people out, his own people, and trying to get them to turn on Nehemiah and trying to divide their people. He tries to tempt him because in verse 13 it says that he wanted him to act in this way so he would sin. He was wanting to mock him. It says in verse 13 that they would give me a bad name and taunt me. Think about how the enemy works in our lives. We'll see the same exact attack, right? In chapter 4, I talked about how the enemy is not creative, how the enemy is predictable. To distract, to malign, to frighten, to discourage, to divide, to tempt, to mock us. And you can think about how each one of these sort of play out. When he tries to distract us, he wants us to lose focus. When he tries to malign us, he wants us to lose authority wherever we're at in whatever we're doing. When he tries to frighten us, he wants us to lose faith in God. When he tries to discourage us, he wants us to give up. When he tries to divide us, he wants us to turn on each other. When he tries to tempt us, he wants us to reject God. And when he tries to mock us, he wants us to just back down. That's how the opposition works, and sometimes it can feel just relentless. And in these 15 verses, these first 14 verses, it's just like that's what Nehemiah has to be feeling. And yet he holds with this convictional purpose. Why? Because he says, I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Every week we think about how we can not just think of Nehemiah, but we can think of one who's greater than Nehemiah. In Jesus, we see someone who is the greater Nehemiah. And each week we've gone back to Jesus to talk about how he shows these traits, these great traits we see in Nehemiah, but he shows them in a way that is perfect, in a way that Nehemiah could never be. We're going to have communion here in just a moment. And this, I hope, is a good way for you to prepare and think about communion as we take the bread and the cup today. In Matthew 27:39, as Jesus is on the cross, do you remember what happens as people pass by? In Matthew 27:39, it says, those who passed by derided him. They wagged their heads, and their voices were shouting, if you are the Son of God, come down. If you really had strength and power, you could come down right now. And it's like Jesus, in that moment, does what Nehemiah did. And as he's on the cross, he's saying, I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Jesus loved us to such a degree. He was so obsessed over his purpose to come and to save us, that when he was on the cross and people were tempting him, you're not really God, or else you could come down off the cross. While he was on the cross, he said, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. I hope that can be in our hearts in a way where we just receive the love of God and what he did for us in a very unique and special way, even as we take the cup and the bread today.